Okay, cool. So this is pretty much all of the setup that we need to do for the app. Now we'll actually start making it do stuff. Um, Incidentally, if you guys start feeling sleepy, then please just like stand up and move to the back of the class or something, because otherwise I get all distracted and it cramps my flow. Okay, so now we're going to start defining some roots in here. And that's what this whole state provider thing does. Except roots in Angular aren't called just roots, they're called states. So a state is like a path, so something in your URL, with usually a controller and a template attached. So that's what a state is. It's a path, it's some kind of URL with a template and a controller attached. It's going to look something like this. So here I have state provider, and then I'm going to define a new state on it. We're not going to write it all bubbly like this. I'm going to put it on separate lines. So first I'm going to come up with a name for this state. We're creating the index path, index template for this, so I'm just going to call it grumble index. And now I put in some parameters for this state. So the first one, as you can probably guess, is the path at which I want this particular state to be activated. The second one is the text, the HTML, the whatever I want to have inside this state. So I'm just going to put I'm the grumbles index in here. With that done, now if I go over here, I should see nothing. That's because I need to go to this /grumbles. So this is where something's going to be a little weird. I'm not just going to go to /grumbles. I'm going to go to I'm going to go to #/grumbles. And there we go. Now I'll talk about why in just a second. In fact, I'm going to be even a little bit more explicit. I'm going to go to 8080 index.html #/grumbles. So this is the whole URL that I'm going to right here. And there we go. Now we got the grumbles index on. I'll talk about the different components of that in a second. But for right now, notice that if I remove this data UI view thing that we put in just a second ago, nothing shows up. So again, this is like the yield or the body. This is where the template is actually going to show up right in here. All right, so let's talk about what's going on up here. Anyone have any thoughts as to why this hash mark is in there? What that's doing in there? Weird, right? So where have you seen these hash marks before? I'm sure you've seen them before in URLs. They are. You're nodding your head. What do they do?
Um, Seems to be like bookmark part of the page as seen them on like one page apps that yeah, I've seen them on one page apps. Like you go to another page and bookmark.
Yeah, kind of. You've also probably seen them in documents like this. So check out what happens when I click on this defining states section. If you look really closely, you can see down here that it's giving me the URL I'm on right now, but with hash defining states at the end of it. If I click on this, now I go to that. Now I'm up here with hash defining states at the end of this. So these are used with jump anchors. A jump anchor is a link whose entire purpose is just to jump you down to some other section of the page. So this thing right here, this is an ID of a particular element. In this case, it's the ID of this defining states header right here. I'll bet if I inspect that, I can see it. Somewhere in here. There we go. Let's see. Where's the ID? Come on, ID. Stop making me look bad. Yeah. Okay, well, GitHub must have some sort of like weird thing built in here. But you can see that there's defining states at the end of that particular ID anyway. But usually, on a simpler page, it would just be the ID of a particular element. GitHub must have some JavaScript or something in here. The important thing here is that when you jump to different parts of this page, it's not refreshing the page. It's not making a new request. It's just going to a different part of the page. So this is another Angular hack. In here, Angular is presenting this thing as a jump angle. The roots, it presents the roots as jump angles. That's so we can go to different URLs up here without refreshing the page. It's important that we don't refresh the page here because all of our data is kept in the front end. Like all of my grumbles right now are, well, I don't have any, but if I did, like yesterday, all the grumbles you did were all hard-coded. As soon as you refresh the page, all of those grumbles would go away. And so this is a way of being able to go to different paths without refreshing the page. This whole thing right here is just a hack to be able to go to different views, go to different URLs without refreshing the page. Any questions about that? Cool. So the important thing here is that for the first part of this class, all of the URLs that you're going to see are going to be index.html followed by a pound followed by some other URL. I could also do just localhost 8080 grumbles. That's because on all servers, index.html is sort of implied. The server is always going to look for an index.html unless you tell it to get something else. So here, this actually has index.html in it, sort of. It's just hidden because it's just sort of implied that it's going to be there. Yeah?
Can you put data, satisfactory space, you put data in that state?
Yeah, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Well, a couple minutes. All right, cool. So here I have my grumbles index. Pretty cool. And you can put HTML and everything as well in here. So I can put an H2 in there, and then it'll show up on here as an H2. And there we go. But writing a whole bunch of HTML just inside this template parameter, inside quotes, is going to get really annoying. So we're not going to do that. In fact, you're probably never actually going to use this template parameter except just for testing things out. Instead, you're going to actually get something from a completely separate HTML file. Remember partials from Rails, and I think we did them in handlebars as well, where it's just like a piece of HTML, usually kept in its own file. Like that's what all the .html.erb files were in Rails. We're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to define an index template for my grumbles. So with me, I'd like you to do this. It's just creating a directory and a file into which we can put this view as soon as Slack decides to reconnect. Okay, well, I'm not going to wait for it. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So it's just making a grumbles folder and then putting an index.html inside that grumbles folder. You can do it in the command line. I'm just going to do it in Atom in here. Whoops. I wanted a grumbles folder. And then I'm going to put an index.html inside there. All right, so I have js/grumbles/index.html. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just this line of HTML I have in here and then just paste it into that index.html file I made. Bam, done. That is my index template in all of its glory. In order to actually use this template, I'm going to change this line here from template to template URL. And then its value is going to be the path to that particular partial I want. So in this case, it's going to be that file we just made, js/grumbles/index.html. And now when I refresh this page, I should still get I'm the grumbles index. And there it is. If I change something in here, yep, I really am. Then it shows up right there. And there we go. One thing to note is that if you have a beginning slash in here, it's not going to work. So it should just be js/grumbles/index.html. Sarah, you have the face of someone who's getting an error. Let me go take a look. Anyone else? yeah, sorry, it's template URL where the RL is lowercase. Yeah, unfortunately, Angular is a little picky about that. So if I do template capital URL, it's not going to work. But if I do template lowercase URL, then it works just fine. Did that fix it? Cool. Anyone else having problems? Algunos problemas? All right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? I mean, check this out. We've got this index.html right here, and then we got this index.html down there. Yeah, that's a little weird, but yes, it is best practice. I hear mumbling, so I'm going to go over and grumbling. Excuse me. Yes.
It's like leftover Cheerios. Oh, you need a slash. There we go.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yep. Yes, if you have 10 page URL, it won't work. It needs to be template URL. Okay, cool. We all good? All right. All distracted. All right. Cool. So here we have this thing, template URL. It is all hunky-dory. Let's define another state. So to do that, you're just going to chain on another state over here. Let's make this one for a show page. So I'm going to slack out the code for this just so you have it. But all I'm doing is just adding on another state down here, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give it a URL, and I'm going to give it a template URL. But check this out. You can use URL parameters in Angular the exact same way you did in Express and Rails. That's what this :id thing is. We have totally seen that before. We have seen that in every other framework that we've used. It's the exact same thing here. And then I'll make a page for it. We're not doing anything with this ID yet, but we will be in a bit. So now I'm going to create a show page for this Grumble. I'm just going to create a new file called show.html. And I'm just going to put this is a Grumble in here. Okay, so here I am on my Grumble's index. And now if I go to /anything, then it should show that show page. So I'm going to go to 42, and it shows this show page. If I go to Wombat Noses, it shows the show page. So Angular isn't smart enough to know that this ID should actually be a number. It's just like, all right, if anyone goes to /grumble/something after it, then I'm going to take them to this template right here. Any questions about that? Teddy, you doing all right? That is not a good sounding cough. Oh, man, I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So we have index and we have show. Do I want to go into that next? Yeah, I guess we'll do that. Okay, cool. So this is all very well, but these don't actually do anything yet. So that's going to be the next step. But I want to point out that this progression we're following right here, where I've just created, I've done a whole bunch of refreshing my page to make sure there's no errors. I've just created a module, make sure that works. Then I've created a couple routes, make sure those work. This is the same progression that I always follow whenever I'm making any app. I feel like making routes and making sure they work, that's sort of an easy win. So that's something I do first just to make sure my app is working. There isn't even any data in them. I'm just making sure these different paths work. And so the progression that we're following in this class is the same one that I would use when I'm developing stuff out in the wild. Brendan, did you have a question?
Yeah, is this still considered a single pagey? And we have like
Yeah, it is a single page. That's actually why I want to have, I'm going to leave this index.html up here. Because technically speaking, we're only ever on this index.html page. My source code is always going to be the exact same thing. When I go to a different view here, it's not refreshing the page. It's just executing some JavaScript to load a different partial piece of HTML. So yeah, this is very much a single page app. Single page in the sense that there is just one main HTML file. The server is only ever going to run, the server is only ever going to render one single HTML
these
file.
partials are just filling in that yield.
Yep. And the server isn't the thing putting in all these different templates and everything. It's my Angular making an AJAX request to those different URLs to get that HTML and then shove it in there.
So it looks like social AJAX.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of AJAX going on underneath the surface with all this stuff. So the next step is going to be actually making some data show up in here. So the next thing we're going to define is a controller. And so a controller in, let's see, in Rails, the job of a controller is to take some data from the model and make it show up in the view. And it's the same concept in Angular. The job of a controller is to take some data and make it show up in the view. But right before we do that, I'm going to make a new module. So we have one module. We have this app.js, this grumbler module. But I'm going to make a new module specifically for grumbles. We're going to have two modules, one for grumbler and one for grumbles. The difference is the grumbler module, this is going to contain all of the logic for the app itself, for the app in its entirety. So that is like doing routes and stuff. The grumbles module, that's where I'm going to put all of the logic to get a specific grumble or to update a specific grumble. I'm going to keep those two things separate to sort of separate my concerns a bit more. I could put them all into one module, but separating it out this way is very much the Angular way, where you have lots of different components working with each other instead of just one ginormous module that does everything. You have a bunch of small separate modules where each module is really just concerned with itself. It's not worrying about other modules. So for Grumbler, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but like imagine if each grumble had comments. Then it might be a good idea to have a grumbles module and a comments module that would interact with each other and all be linked inside the grumbler module. So I would say like a good rule of thumb would be any model you have in here should probably have its own module, as well as the app itself. So to create a grumbles module, I'm going to create a new file inside this grumbles folder called grumbles.module.js. Grumbles.module.js. Doesn't have to be called .module.js, but that's just a visual reminder to me that this thing is a module. To define it, I'm just going to copy everything. Well, I'm going to copy this stuff. Actually, I'm not even going to copy that stuff because we don't need most of that. First thing is going to be use strict. Then I'm going to set up my iffy. And then I'm going to do angular.module, and I'm going to call this one grumbles. If I leave it like this, it's going to throw an error at me. Anyone tell me why? What am I missing? And yeah, so what do I need to change about this? Yep. So without these array brackets, it's going to look for an existing module called grumbles. It doesn't have one. It has grumbler, but it doesn't have grumbles. So putting this array in there is telling it, hey, I'm defining a new module. So I'm going to do that. And now a couple things need to happen. Two things. One is I need to include the URL for that here in this main HTML page. So anytime you create a new .js, you're going to need to include it in here as well. So I'm just going to put in the path to that, grumbles.module.js. There we go. I'll refresh the page. Okay, no errors yet. Excuse me. Cool. So now that we have this module, well, let's see. Okay, I said there are two things. I'm wondering when I should say it, but I'll say it right now. We've created this other module. Now we need to inject this module as a dependency in our app's main module. That is, we need to tell Grumbler that grumbles exists. The way we're going to do that is by going back to this app.js. So I was in grumbles.module.js. Now I'm going back to app.js. And I'm just going to put grumbles in here. And so this is telling the grumbler module, hey, I want you to use grumbles as well. And now when I refresh the page, still no errors, so this is good. So now my grumbler module is going to use anything attached to grumbles as well. Now they're linked together. They're working together. Sarah. Yeah. No, that's a really good question. So a module is like a lot of things. It's sort of like a gem, like you remember gems from Ruby. It's sort of like a jQuery plugin. It's sort of like a JavaScript library. It's sort of like a model. It's sort of like a lot of things all sort of packaged together. And so I would just consider it to be like just a component of your app. Like if you think about the main different things interacting with each other in an app, then that's sort of what I would use for module. But it's another thing where there's not really a clear definition. I mean, maybe something doesn't need to be a module. Maybe you can get away with just having it be a controller or something. So one thing that may be helpful, I wonder if I included a link to it in here. Well, I'll slack this out later on, but there are a couple of really nice articles about like when should I use what in Angular? When should I use a factory, a service, a module, blah, blah, blah. And so I'll slack that out so you have sort of a handy cheat sheet of when to use when. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when the browser runs app.js,
Mm-hmm.
how does it know what Rumble is? When you
Yeah. Really good question. Really good question. So I don't actually know because that's Angular sort of underneath the hood. But my assumption is that Angular just sort of waits to see if this thing gets loaded and then uses it if it's available. That's sort of my guess. So I'm not sure why it works here, whereas if I were to put this, well, no, it is different from putting it up here because this is defining the Angular object itself, so that's a different thing. But down here with dependencies, I think it just waits to see if anything gets loaded with that name. I still would. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, but I still would. All right, so we have this Grumbles module. Now we're actually going to start putting some controllers onto it. So the purpose of these controllers is going to be how we get some Grumbles onto this actual page. We played around with controllers yesterday. We're going to do it again now. I'm going to attach all of the controllers for Grumbles to the Grumbles module. And so Angular is different from well, again, Rails. I'm just going to keep trying on Rails. And that in Rails, you had one controller file that had a whole bunch of actions inside it, right? Like you had one controller file and it had index, show, blah, blah, blah. It had everything in it. Angular follows a different set of rules. In Angular, you have one controller for one view. One controller, one view. So here I have two different views so far. I have index and show. So how many controllers am I going to have? Two, exactly. We're going to start off with just one for right now, but eventually I'm going to want to have two, one for each view. The first one I'm going to do is the index controller. And the way I'm going to name it is with index.controller.js. The reason we're following this naming convention is because when you list the stuff out alphabetically, the way Adam does, it makes all of these things sort of line up nicely to each other. I have index.html and then the controller related to that right next to each other visually in my sidebar. All right. So I just created a new JavaScript file. So I need to include it in my main index.html. Doesn't do anything yet, but it's going to need to be in here at some point. So this is JS grumbles index controller.js. Refresh, make sure I didn't screw anything up. Nope, still good. All right. All right, so here is what the controller is going to look like to begin with. So you can go ahead and paste in what I just selected out. It's this thing. So just going through what's going on in here, you can see we're using strict again and another iffy. And then I'm saying, okay, I want to take the Grumbles module, and then I want to add this controller onto it. Now, if I had multiple dependencies, I would do a dependency injection in here the exact same way I do anywhere else. It's just we only have one thing in here, which is the function. Grumble index controller function is a mouthful. You totally don't need to call it that. In fact, we probably shouldn't have called it that just because that's a lot to write out. But you know what, whatever. I mean, a better name might be something just like controller function. I don't know, but I like to be explicit and hear myself talk, so I use a really long name. Cool, so there's that. Make sure something shows up over here and nothing shows up over here, because I'm going to need to go to the index. And still nothing shows up. Well, that's weird. My controller's not doing anything. So that's because I need to tell the state that we're using right now to use this particular controller. So I'm going to go into app.js, and I'm going to tell it which controller to use. I'm going to tell it to use controller, wait, no, what is it? Grumbles index controller. Whatever the name is right here. Grumble index controller, Grumble index controller. That should match that. Not that, that, not that, that. Grumble index controller. And now when I refresh the page, now I should see the controller, I should see this console log, I'm in the controller. And there it is. So now I've defined my controller and I have told the state to use this particular controller. The controller's not really doing anything yet, it's just console logging stuff, but it will. Questions about this so far? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I go to /32, well, nothing happens. And if I just were to start off going to /32, there's no I'm in the controller. I don't get that I'm in the controller until I go to just /grumbles. That's only activated when I'm at this particular page. View. David?
A couple things.
Mhm.
It feels like we shouldn't have to include script tags for everything. That once app.js knows about it, by including script tags for app.js.
It should just happen automatically. Yeah, I agree. The reason that doesn't happen that way is because Angular doesn't know that I have all of this. It doesn't know what I've named my files, and it doesn't know what folder they're in. It doesn't know the path to those files. There probably are actually Angular libraries you can use that do that for you, so you don't need to include all of those different scripts. But yeah, I mean, these things over here, I mean, I could call all of these wombat noses. And as long as I've done script source wombat noses in my index.html, this is going to work perfectly fine. These names over here have no bearing on what the file actually does. The way I'm naming things over here is purely for my own visual purposes. Visually, it makes sense to me. And so with that in mind, Angular doesn't know what I like visually, and so it doesn't know which paths and file names and everything it should use to get all this stuff. So that's why we have to do it that way.
Yeah, that's I guess from the second that feels that we never did in the past, especially with the module. The Rumble module is kind of exists in the background and never tell it which files creating it or anything. It's just
Well, yeah, so the order in which this all works is like, first the page loads, and it loads all of these things. So Angular it's aware of these files. It knows these exist. Once it's done loading everything, then it's going to go through and it's going to insert the controllers and the modules and everything in the appropriate place. So it knows that this module exists because it defined it in here. But yeah, I agree, it's a little weird. Other questions? Yeah.
we also like import those into the other JavaScript files.
Yeah, but that's going to get really ugly really quickly because then, well, I mean, then it's basically the same thing that you have here. I mean, it's basically script tags just written in a different way. And then if you then I would have to put import Grumbles module, and then in the Grumbles module import controller and everything, and that can start getting pretty ugly pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've seen for some other libraries and stuff that you download, sometimes they have a lot of different files that that's how they can do it.
Yeah, it's totally doable here. It's just a little bit more complicated than we want to get into so far. All right. So now we can start actually doing some stuff with this controller. This controller isn't doing anything yet. Get that. All right. So what's actually going on here when you create a new controller is that this controller is, well, you know what? I'm not even going to get into that because that's too high level. I'm just going to say that the way you sort of pass stuff from this controller into the view is using this. So if I want to make something called grumbles available in the view, I'm going to do it like this. These are some grumbles. This would be equivalent to @grumbles in Ruby. So this is the way you're going to take stuff from the controller and make it available in the view, is with this. Now, when I go into the view, I can do this. I've got way too many tabs open. Go away, go away. Now well, actually, I can't do anything yet. I lied. Let's see. What is yeah. Okay, so what's going on here is that this has loaded the controller, but trying to figure out the best way to phrase this. So I'll just go for it. So when you do this controller thing right here, what it's actually doing is it's creating a new instance of this particular function right here. So using controller right here, it's as if you were to do new Grumble index controller function, just like that. That's what's actually happening here. So it's creating this new instance of the controller function. But in order to actually make that instance available in the view, we need to sort of save it to a variable. We need to take that instance and save it into a variable that's going to be available in the view. Yes. We're going to do that using controller as. And then I'm going to call this Grumble index view model. So I know that's weird. Here we're saying, okay, I want you to new this controller, and here I want you to save that controller as this particular thing. I want you to save this controller as this particular thing. The reason I'm calling it a view model is because the job of a controller is to take stuff from a model and make it available in a view. And so this is just sort of a reminder to me of what this is doing. I could also call this wombat noses. I'm just going with Grumble index view model to be explicit here. We're using super explicit names in this intro today, just so it's really clear what everything is. But here's the cool part. Now I can go into this index.html and I can do Grumble index view model dot grumbles. And then if I did everything right, you should see these are some grumbles. And there we go. So it took this grumbles from inside here. If I change this to wombat, now this also needs to be wombat. So that's how they sort of translate. It goes from inside this controller through this state and out into the view. Davis, what was your question?
It seems like rumble.module.js and index.controller.js are doing double work. And that rumble.module.js is essentially this module rumbles. And then index.controller.js is just appending this controller attribute to the module.
Mm-hmm.
And just playing around with it, if you add the square brackets to the index.controller.js version of the module,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need the rumble.module.js.
Yeah.
The and the
So we
controller at the same step.
so we could attach this. Oh, you mean like doing? Are you talking about using something like the whole ng controller thing?
No, index.controller.js.
Uh-huh.
Where you have, if you just put a comma in the square brackets.
Yeah, so that's because we're not doing anything with this module yet. We only have one controller. But that's going to be important later on when we're eventually going to have multiple controllers attached to this Grumbles module. So for right now, we have just one. So yeah, we don't even need this thing right here. We could just create the module right here. But later on, we are going to want to create the module first and then attach a whole bunch of crap to it. So,
When you said that by setting the controller and the routes or whatever,
mm-hmm.
the instance of that controller function,
Mm-hmm.
so if you only have one view for controller, you only always going to have one instance of that function.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, so here we go, and this is how you're going to get data into your page. It is just like this, using the controller just like this. So your grumbles, they're not actually going to be a string saying these are some grumbles. They're going to be some actual data. So tomorrow we're going to give you an API to work with where you can actually get grumbles from that API, post to that API, blah, blah, blah. But for today, we're just going to keep on faking it while we're sort of playing around with all this stuff. So tomorrow we're going to get to the API stuff, but for right now, we're just going to fake some more grumbles. So what I would like you to do is go into your main index.html, that is this one, and then create a global variable of grumbles. Something like this, var grumbles. I'll just use the example from in here. Something like this. Jesus Christ. Ah. So yeah, we're totally faking this right now. But this variable right here, this is a global variable, which is now going to be accessible in all of our other files. So what that means is that now that I have this thing in here, this grumbles, I'm just going to refresh the page, make sure I didn't screw anything up. I didn't. Now I can say this.grumbles equals grumbles. And that's going to take all of the grumbles that we just defined right here. Now if I refresh this page, I should see some JSON of grumbles, and there they are. Here are my new grumbles. So now those are available on the page. Questions about that, about using that data? Obviously the next step is going to be listing out these grumbles one by one, but questions about getting to this point so far? Brendan?
So all data we want to get to the view should go via this grumble index control.
Into the index view, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And all functions that go right will be just will be like
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question, or great point. So you can also do functions in here. So if I do this hello equals function alert sup Brendan. Now I have access to that in my index.html as well. I'm going to split this over to the right. So now I can go in here and I can do something like, oops, wrong index.html, damn. Okay, I'm not going to split. I can do something like button, data, ng, click, Grumble index view model dot, what do they call it? Hello. And now I should be able to click that and have this thing execute. And there it is. Yep. So you can put data and you can put functions into your view just by using that exact same syntax, like this. I'm not going to do anything with functions yet, but that's how you would do it. All right, so I have the grumbles out here. What am I going to use? What directive am I going to use to make a list of grumbles? Anyone know? Yep, repeat. So to repeat these, I'm going to do something like this. Div, and now I forget, so I'm going to look back at my notes. Data ng repeat. And this already should work okay. I'll just put test in here. I should see two, whoa. Yeah, I thought I could do it without that, but maybe not. Okay, yeah, so I need to do this grumble in grumble index view model dot grumbles. Let me make sure that works and I'm not forgetting something. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is as if I were to do, in Rails, it's as if I were to do this, dot each do grumble. It's the exact same thing as that. This variable right here is what I want each grumble to be called. I could also call this one wombat if I wanted to, and this would be wombat down here. But I think grumble makes more sense. Now I can print out each individual grumble. I can do grumble.title. Moment of truth, let's see if this works. And there we go. There's the grumble app, spitting out each individual grumble. Questions about, yeah, Samir?
So yesterday we have to, in HTML, we did like Grumble index view model, or Grumble controller as Grumble index view model. Because we already set that in the state associated with that URL, that's automatically happening.
Yeah. So we could do that whole like div ng controller thing in here, but I think it's a little bit more convenient in state having all of that just defined right in here.
So that's doing the same thing.
Yep, and you could do it either way.
And the as is right there.
Yep, exactly. Other questions? All right, let me remind myself what the next step is. Okay, so let's make this a little bit better of an app. Point we're going to want to show each of these individual grumbles. Right now we have a show page built in right now, like right here, but that's not very good. We want it to actually show each individual grumble. So we have a crappy index page. Now we're going to move towards crappy show pages. It would be really nice if we had links to those individual show pages. So that's what we're going to do next, is put in links to each show page. We haven't really done anything with the show pages yet, but we're going to put some links in there. So that's going to use this weird thing called sref. I'm going to slack this out so you have it. That is terrifying. All right, and the result is going to be something like this. I'm going to create an anchor. That's nothing new. But then instead of giving it an href, the way I normally would with an anchor, I'm going to do UI sref. And then I'm going to put in grumble show. Any thoughts as to what the S in sref stands for? Nope. Exactly. State reference. So referring to another state. Grumble show is defined over here. So if this was wombat, then this would need to be wombat. I'm really sorry if you guys are tired of wombat. I just can't think of other words. Okay, and so now, well, this works, but it doesn't do a whole lot yet. We want to pass in the ID somehow. So what you can do is put in an object in here. I'm going to put in ID 42. We'll put in the actual ID in just a second, but for right now we're just going to do ID 42. And now if you look closely, you can see that there's a 42 over here. So it's putting in this ID that I've defined. Again, at some point we're going to want this to be the actual ID, but for right now I'm just showing you that, hey, this ID thing works. So what's going on here is that, well, maybe it'll be a bit easier to show you if I put in something else. So I'm going to put in wombat. So now I'm going to make this URL grumbles ID wombat. And then in here I'm going to say wombat is, I don't know, noses. And now that should make all of these URLs 42 grumble/42/noses. So it's taking whatever I put in this object right here, matching it up with whatever variables are defined in here, and then just sort of filling out the URL for me. This is really nice because I can decide, oh, I actually want this to be at, I don't know, gles/id/wombat. And it's going to update all of these URLs automatically. I mean, the alternative, which is much less attractive, would be go href equals grumbles / and then putting the grumble ID somewhere in there, which isn't very dry. Whereas it's much drier this way, and then I don't have to go and update that thing. Show you change the root over here. All right, so the last step is to make it so that this goes to an actual show page. Let me just undo all my wombat stuff in here. So the problem is these grumbles don't actually have IDs. All of the data we have for grumbles is right here, just right here. All they have is a title, and that's it. So what can we use to differentiate these different grumbles? We're not going to use their title text, their index, exactly. Instead of an ID, we're just going to fake it with their index for right now. Inside any ng repeat, you have access to this variable called $index. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting something else. Yep, that's it. So you automatically get access to this $index thing. Bless you. When I go in here, now I can see that this one is /0 and this one is /1. There we go. So it's automatically got the index. This one is /0 and this one is /1. And so now I have ways of getting to these individual show pages, which don't do anything yet, but I have a way of getting there at least. Questions about that? Incidentally, I know we're like totally going over a crap ton in this class, but as with all the lesson plans, this one is written out to be pretty like textbooky, so you can always read back through it if you want. And this is more just to sort of introduce this stuff than for it to be like, okay, now you know how to do an Angular app. It's more of just sort of exploring all the different components. Samir?
So that doesn't actually, you're not actually changing the state of
Yep, it's not refreshing the page. It's just going over here. But yeah, so this is one thing. I'm getting really tired of having to type in these URLs up here to go back to the Grumbles index. So how would I make this a link that would always take me back to the Grumbles index? What could I use? No, not have. Well, okay, yeah. I could cheat, and I could just do the easy thing, which would just be something like that. But I'm not going to cheat. We're going to do it the Angular way. Based on what we just saw. I heard someone whisper sref. Yeah, let's try it. Data, UI, sref. And then what is the sref going to be for the index? Say what? Nope, that's the URL. Where's the state name in here for the index? Grumble index, exactly. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add Grumble index. And now I have a handy link to the Grumble index on every page. So now this will always take me back to the Grumble index. And again, it's not refreshing the page. So all of my data is still intact until I actually refresh the page. Let's take another break there. Come back at 5 till. Then we'll wrap up, and well, wrap up with me blabbering, and you guys are going to start working on some stuff individually.